Marcus smiled when Elena went completely still. His mother had just praised her for keeping the family together, but Marcus leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, sometimes I wonder what she actually brings to this marriage." Elena's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Nobody laughed. Marcus looked around the table, then back at his wife. "I'm serious. If you're that unhappy with me, Elena, go find better." She looked at him for a few seconds. Then she slowly put her fork down. Marcus seemed to expect an argument. Maybe tears. Maybe the same apology and forgiveness routine they'd had before. Instead, Elena reached beneath her chair for her purse. Diane whispered her name. Elena stood, and when Marcus said, "Where are you going?" she finally looked at him with an expression he had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. Welcome to Mr. Graham's story, where every story leaves a lesson. Whether you're new here or part of our growing family, thank you for being here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and as the story unfolds, tell me what you would have done in the same situation. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more meaningful stories to people around the world. Now, let's begin today's story. Elena first met Marcus in Nashville when she was still trying to decide what kind of life she wanted. Marcus already seemed to know. He had a steady career, knew how to talk to people without trying too hard, and carried himself with the kind of confidence Elena sometimes wished she had. He wasn't the loudest person in a room. He just seemed comfortable wherever he was. Elena liked that about him. Their first few months together were ordinary in the best way. They grabbed dinner after work. They sat in the car talking longer than they intended to. Marcus teased her about how long it took her to choose something from a restaurant menu. "You've been looking at that thing for 10 minutes. I want to make the right decision. It's chicken. That doesn't mean I shouldn't think about it." He laughed. She eventually ordered the chicken. Years later, Elena would remember conversations like that more clearly than some of their bigger moments. They married after a few years and bought a house in Nashville that wasn't particularly impressive, but Elena loved it. They argued over paint colors before they ever agreed on a wall. Marcus wanted something darker. Elena wanted something lighter. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he told her. "You picked gray. Gray is normal." "Exactly. That's the problem." He laughed, and eventually they compromised on a color neither of them had originally wanted. That was marriage for them. Compromise, bills, takeout on Fridays because neither of them felt like cooking, family dinners that somehow lasted 3 hours, plans for vacations they sometimes couldn't afford yet. They talked about children too, not constantly, but enough that Elena sometimes caught herself imagining what Marcus would be like as a father. There were difficult seasons, but there was real affection underneath them. When Elena's car broke down on a rainy night, Marcus drove across town to help her. When her grandmother became ill, he rearranged his schedule so Elena could spend more time with her. And when Elena doubted herself at work, Marcus was one of the first people to tell her she was capable of more. "You're better than you think you are," he told her once. She had believed him. That was part of why the changes were so difficult to notice. Nothing happened all at once. Marcus simply started coming home later. At first, Elena didn't think much of it. His job had always been demanding. Then the late nights became normal. His phone started staying in his hand more often. If he walked into the kitchen, the phone came with him. If he went upstairs, it came with him. One evening, Elena noticed him answering a message during dinner. She waited until he put the phone down. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." "You sure?" Marcus nodded. "Just work." She accepted that. A week later, he came home almost 2 hours later than usual. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table with leftovers in front of her. "You eat?" he asked. "Not yet." He glanced at the clock. "You didn't have to wait." "I know." Marcus opened the refrigerator. For some reason, Elena almost told him that she had missed him. Instead, she watched him take out a bottle of water. "You're working late again tomorrow?" "Probably." "Oh." He looked at her. "What?" "Nothing." Marcus nodded and walked upstairs. Elena stayed at the table for another minute. Then she put the leftovers away. She didn't think their marriage was in trouble. Not yet. She thought Marcus was tired. She thought work was getting worse. She thought they were going through one of those stretches married couples sometimes went through, and because nothing had broken loudly enough to demand her attention, Elena kept telling herself the same thing. It would pass. The first criticism Elena could remember clearly was about the kitchen. Marcus came home late one Thursday, opened the refrigerator, and stood there for a moment. "You didn't cook?" Elena looked up from her laptop. "No. I thought we'd order something." Marcus closed the refrigerator. "Okay." Something about the way he said it made Elena look at him. "What?" "Nothing. You said it like something." He shrugged. "I'm just tired." So they ordered dinner. A few weeks later, it was the house. Marcus walked through the living room and stopped near the coffee table. "Did you leave this here?" Elena glanced over. "I guess." He picked up a stack of mail and moved it. "This place is always a mess lately." Elena stared at him. "Always?" Marcus sighed. "I'm not starting anything. You just said it's always a mess." "I said lately." "That isn't what you said." He gave her a tired look. "See? This is what I mean." "What?" "You turn everything into an argument." Elena didn't answer. Marcus walked away. That became the pattern. The comments were rarely big enough to justify a serious confrontation. He'd mentioned that dinner used to be ready earlier. He'd point out that Elena seemed less interested in her career. He'd ask why she spent so much time worrying about family matters. Sometimes he'd make a comment and laugh afterward, as if that made it harmless. "You've gotten comfortable. That's not necessarily a bad thing." "I didn't say it was." "You made it sound like one." "I'm just saying." That phrase started appearing often. "I'm just saying." Elena began hearing it before he even finished the sentence. One evening, she told him she was thinking about taking on a new project at work. Marcus barely looked up from his phone. "Do you actually want that?" "Yeah, I think so." "You haven't seemed that ambitious lately." Elena paused. "What does that mean?" He finally looked at her. "Nothing bad. I'm just saying you used to want more." "I still want more." "Okay." There was something about that "okay" that irritated her. "What?" Marcus shook his head. "Nothing, Elena." She closed her laptop. "Oh, say it." He leaned back. "Why does everything have to become a discussion?" "Because you keep making comments and then acting like I imagine them." "I said you used to be more ambitious. That's not an insult." "It doesn't feel like a compliment." Marcus rubbed his forehead. "I've had a long day." Elena looked away. So had she, but she didn't say that. That was becoming another pattern. She was tired too, but somehow there was never a good moment to say it. If Marcus came home stressed, she gave him space. If he was frustrated, she listened. If he was quiet, she didn't push. Eventually, she realized she was spending more time deciding what not to say than actually talking to her husband. One Saturday morning, Marcus stood in the kitchen making coffee. Elena walked in. "Morning." "Morning." She poured herself some. He glanced at her. "You okay?" "Yeah." "You seem distant." Elena looked at him. For a second, she almost laughed. "Distant?" "Yeah." She set the coffee down. "I've been trying not to argue with you." Marcus frowned. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Exactly." He stared at her. Then he picked up his coffee. "You're making something out of nothing." Elena didn't respond. She watched him walk into the other room. Later that morning, she caught herself wondering whether she really had changed. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe Marcus was under pressure. Maybe marriage had simply become harder than she expected. Those explanations were easier to live with than the alternative. So Elena adjusted. She stopped bringing up little things. Stopped asking where his mind was when he seemed distracted. Stopped correcting him when he misunderstood something. Marcus noticed the silence. He just misunderstood what it meant. He thought Elena was pulling away from him. Elena knew the truth. She wasn't pulling away. She was getting tired of reaching. The message appeared while Elena was putting away the dishes. Marcus had left his phone on the kitchen counter. That alone wasn't unusual. What caught her attention was the name. She recognized it from work conversations. The younger woman Marcus had mentioned several times. Elena didn't pick up the phone. She didn't need to. The message appeared across the screen, long enough for her to read it. It wasn't explicit. There was no confession, no obvious declaration, just a familiarity that didn't belong in a message between coworkers. Elena stood still. A few seconds later, Marcus walked back into the kitchen. He saw her looking at the phone. His expression changed. What? Elena looked at him. Nothing. Marcus crossed the room quickly and picked up the phone. Why were you looking at it? I wasn't. You were standing right there. I saw the message. He slipped the phone into his pocket. It was work. Elena nodded. Okay. Marcus kept looking at her. What? Nothing. She turned back toward the sink. He didn't move. You believe me? Elena's hands stopped under the water. I said okay. Marcus stared at her another moment. Then he walked away. That night, he took his phone into the bathroom. Elena noticed. She didn't say anything. After that, small things began adding up. Marcus started putting his phone face down. He changed his passcode. He took calls outside. Sometimes he would say he needed to run an errand and return much later than expected. When Elena asked where he'd been, the answer was usually simple. Work. One Friday, a charge appeared on their account. A hotel. Elena stared at the transaction on her laptop. Marcus was standing in the kitchen. What was this? He walked over. What? She turned the screen toward him. The hotel. Marcus barely looked at it. Work thing. Overnight? Yeah. You didn't tell me. I didn't think I needed to. Elena looked at him. He sighed. It's work, Elena. She closed the laptop. Okay. Marcus walked away. The explanation was plausible. That was the problem. There was always just enough of an explanation to make her feel foolish for asking. A dinner appeared a few days later. Then a rideshare charge across town at nearly midnight. Then another hotel. Elena didn't confront him. She started keeping track. Not because she had some elaborate plan. She just needed to know whether she was imagining a pattern. She wrote dates in a notebook. Hotel, dinner, late ride, hotel. She noticed that Marcus became especially attentive whenever she seemed suspicious. One evening, he came home carrying her favorite dessert. I saw this and thought of you. Elena smiled automatically. Thanks. He kissed her forehead. For a moment, she almost let herself relax. That was what made everything so confusing. He could still be tender. He could still make her laugh. He could still be the man who once drove across town in the rain when her car broke down. Then his phone buzzed. Marcus glanced at it. He didn't smile, but he turned the screen away from her. Elena watched him walk into the hallway. That night, she opened the notebook again. She looked at the dates. Then she added one more line. She didn't know exactly what Marcus was doing, but she knew she wasn't imagining it anymore. And for the first time, Elena wondered what she would find if she stopped asking him questions and started looking for answers herself. Elena stopped looking for explanations and started looking for a pattern. The notebook on her kitchen table had become uncomfortable to open. Hotel, dinner, late ride, hotel. She added the dates she'd remembered from Marcus's schedule, then compared them with the charges on their account. One of the hotel stays fell on a night Marcus had told her he was working late. Another matched a dinner he had described as a meeting. Elena stared at the screen. Then she checked the date again. She wasn't trying to catch him anymore. She was trying to prove to herself that she wasn't losing her mind. A few days later, Marcus left his laptop open while he showered. Elena hadn't gone looking for it. She was sitting nearby when a notification appeared. She hesitated. Then another appeared. This time, the message included the co-worker's name. Elena read it. Then another. She didn't scroll through everything. She didn't need to. There were references to places they had been together. Private jokes. A conversation about when Marcus was going to finally deal with things at home. Elena's hand went cold on the edge of the desk. She kept reading. Marcus had told the woman that his marriage was basically over. He said Elena had become distant. He said they barely connected anymore. He made it sound as if divorce were something that had been inevitable for months. Elena sat back. That part hurt differently. The affair was one thing. Hearing her own marriage described by her husband to another woman was something else, because Elena remembered the conversations Marcus had never mentioned. She remembered asking what was wrong. She remembered trying to talk about their future. She remembered sitting across from him at the kitchen table and asking whether he was happy. He had said he was tired. Now she was reading that he had apparently been telling someone else that he was already halfway out the door. Elena closed the laptop. She went downstairs, grabbed her purse, and drove without deciding where she was going. She eventually parked outside a grocery store and sat there. People pushed carts past her car. A man loaded bags into his trunk. Someone's child was complaining about wanting candy. Elena watched all of it through the windshield. She wasn't crying. She couldn't. She was stuck on one thought. If Marcus had been unhappy, he could have told her. He could have asked for counseling. He could have asked for space. He could have said he didn't know whether the marriage could continue. Instead, he had made another woman part of the decision before Elena had even been given the chance to know there was a decision to make. That was when something shifted. Elena wasn't thinking about how to catch Marcus anymore. She was thinking about how to get out. And she knew she couldn't do it by confronting him that night. Not yet. She needed to be ready first. The next morning, Elena went to work as usual. She answered emails. She sat through a meeting. She laughed when a coworker made a joke about the office coffee. Nobody looking at her would have guessed that she had spent part of the previous evening reading messages that had changed her marriage. That was almost comforting. Work gave her somewhere to be. Home didn't. When she got back that afternoon, Marcus was already there. He was standing in the kitchen, opening a package. Hey. He looked at her. You okay? Elena put her bag down. Yeah. Long day. Marcus nodded. Then, almost casually, he held up what he'd bought. I got those cookies you like. Elena looked at the package. Thanks. She took one. Marcus smiled. For a few seconds, everything felt painfully familiar. That was the part Elena hadn't prepared for. She still knew the way he took his coffee. She still knew which television shows he would pretend not to like and then watch anyway. She still knew that when he was stressed, he rubbed the back of his neck without realizing it. Knowing the truth hadn't erased any of that. That night, Marcus fell asleep beside her. Elena lay awake. She looked at him in the darkness. There was a time when seeing him asleep had made her feel safe. Now she was lying next to a man whose phone she no longer trusted. She turned away. The following weekend, Elena started looking at apartments. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom. Decent neighborhood. Close enough to work that she wouldn't spend half her paycheck getting there. She opened a spreadsheet and began calculating. Rent, utilities, groceries, car payment, insurance. She stared at the numbers. It wasn't impossible. It just wasn't comfortable. Marcus had always handled certain bills, and Elena realized how easy it had been to let that arrangement become part of the structure of their marriage. She would have to change that. She didn't tell him. She didn't tell her friends either. She wasn't ready for the questions. Where are you going? Are you sure? What did he do? Have you talked to him? Are you going back? Elena didn't have answers she wanted to give anyone. Some nights she almost told herself the affair didn't have to mean the marriage was over. People made mistakes. People apologized. People went to counseling. She even imagined Marcus admitting everything and asking her to stay. Then she would remember the messages. Not just that he had cheated, that he had already created a life in his head where Elena was the problem and someone else was waiting for him. That was harder to forgive. One Saturday morning, Marcus walked into the bedroom while Elena was folding clothes. You've been weird lately. She kept folding. Have the first? Yeah. What do you mean? He shrugged. You're quiet. Elena placed a shirt in the drawer. I'm tired. You've been tired for weeks. She looked at him. So have you. Marcus didn't answer. For a moment, neither did she. Then he said, I don't know what you want from me. Elena almost laughed. The words were so close to everything she had wanted to hear that they hurt. She wanted honesty. She wanted him to tell her what was happening. She wanted him to stop making her feel like she was imagining the distance between them. But she wasn't ready to give him the chance to turn that conversation around. So she simply said, I don't know. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, He walked out. Elena finished folding the clothes. She didn't cry. She just put the last shirt away and closed the drawer. That night, she saved another copy of the records she had collected. Then she wrote down the name of the apartment she could afford. She wasn't ready to leave that day, but she had stopped asking herself whether she could. Now she was figuring out when. Marcus noticed the changes before he understood them. Elena wasn't asking as many questions anymore. She didn't check what time he would be home. She didn't ask about the woman from his office. She didn't even react when he took his phone into another room. At first, Marcus thought it was a relief. Then it started bothering him. One Tuesday evening, he came home and found Elena at the kitchen table with her laptop open. "You've been quiet." "I've been working." Marcus pulled out a chair. "You've been like this for a while." Elena looked at him. "Like what?" "I don't know." He leaned back. "It's like you're somewhere else." Elena closed the laptop. "Maybe I'm tired." Marcus gave a short laugh. "You're always tired now." She looked at him, but said nothing. That silence irritated him more than an argument would have. Marcus had started telling himself that Elena was changing. It made the situation easier to understand. If she was unhappy, then his unhappiness had a reason. If she was distant, then maybe he wasn't entirely responsible for the distance between them. He didn't say any of that to Elena. He said it to other people. His brother asked him one night how things were going. Marcus shrugged. "Not great." "What happened?" "I don't know. Elena's just different." "Different how?" Marcus hesitated. "She's not happy." It sounded reasonable. That was what made it useful. Around the same time, Marcus began keeping notes. Not a formal diary, just things on his phone. Dates of arguments, messages from Elena when she was frustrated, times she had told him she needed space. He saved screenshots. He kept them without explaining why. One evening, Elena sent him a message while she was at work. "Can you please handle dinner tonight? I'm exhausted." Marcus saved it. Another time, after an argument, she wrote, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." He saved that too. He didn't save the conversation before it. He didn't save what had caused the argument. He didn't save his own messages, only hers. Marcus was building something without admitting to himself exactly what it was. He told his mother that Elena had become difficult. Diane frowned. "Are you two okay?" "We're trying." That answer made him sound patient. He told the younger woman that Elena had been emotionally checked out for months. "She barely talks to me anymore," he said. The younger woman was quiet. "And you're still living together?" "For now." She sighed. "Marcus, you keep saying that." "I know. So when?" He looked away. "I'll handle it." He believed he would, eventually, when the timing was right, when the finances were sorted out, when Elena stopped making things complicated. The strange thing was that Marcus still didn't think of himself as cruel. He thought he was protecting himself. He thought he was preparing for a difficult divorce. And because Elena had become quieter, he assumed she had no idea what he was doing. He was wrong about that. One afternoon, Elena came home earlier than expected and found Marcus at the dining table with his phone. He quickly locked the screen. She stopped. "What were you doing?" "Nothing." She watched him for a moment. Then she nodded. "Okay." She walked past him. Marcus looked after her. He didn't know that Elena had already learned something important. When someone is preparing to leave you, they don't always announce it. Sometimes they simply stop arguing about the future. That night, Elena sat on the edge of the bed with her laptop open. She looked at the apartment listing, then at their joint account, then at the copies of Marcus's messages and records she had saved. She closed the laptop. She wasn't going to confront him yet. She wasn't going to warn him, and she wasn't going to let him decide what everyone would believe about why she left. Elena had finally made her decision. She would leave. She just needed to choose the moment. By the time Elena arrived at Marcus's parents' house, she had already decided she wasn't going to tell anyone what she knew. She wasn't sure how she would handle the evening. She only knew she didn't want another argument. Diane greeted her at the door and hugged her. "You made it." "Of course." Inside, Marcus's brother and sister-in-law were already at the table. Someone had brought dessert. Marcus was pouring himself another drink. Elena sat beside him. For the first half hour, things felt almost normal. His brother complained about work. Diane talked about a neighbor. Someone made a joke about Marcus never answering family group texts. Marcus laughed. Elena smiled when everyone else did. Then Diane looked across the table. Elena, that casserole was good. You always do so much for everybody. Elena started to answer. Thank. Marcus laughed. She does like everybody, thinking she carries the whole house. Elena turned toward him. What? Marcus shrugged. Nothing. His brother looked down at his plate. Diane's smile disappeared. Marcus took another drink. No, seriously, he said. Sometimes you'd think I'm just sitting around doing nothing. Elena kept her voice low. I didn't say that. You don't have to. Marcus. What? She stopped. There was no point. Marcus leaned back. I work all week. I handle plenty around here, but somehow it's never enough. Diane shifted in her chair. Marcus, let's not. No, Mom, it's fine. He looked at Elena. She wants to talk about how unhappy she is? Fine. Elena stared at him. I haven't said I'm unhappy. He gave a small laugh. You don't have to. The room had gone quiet. Elena could hear silverware moving against plates. Marcus was drinking more quickly now, but he wasn't drunk. He knew what he was saying. He looked at her and shook his head. You know what? If you think you can do better, go find better. Nobody moved. Elena looked down at her plate. For a moment, she noticed something strangely ordinary. There was a small smear of gravy near the edge of it. She picked up her napkin and wiped it away. Then she placed the napkin beside her fork. Marcus watched her. Elena? She looked at him. He seemed to expect anger. Instead, she reached beneath her chair for her purse. Diane whispered, Elena. Elena stood. Marcus blinked. Where are you going? She didn't answer. She slipped the purse over her shoulder. Then she looked at Marcus one last time. There was no argument coming. He could see that now. And suddenly, for the first time that evening, Marcus looked uncertain. Elena's hand was already on the door when Marcus finally stood. Elena, wait! She stopped, but didn't turn around. Marcus looked at his family, then back at her. You're really leaving? Elena opened the door. I think I should. Because of what I said? She glanced over her shoulder. You told me to find better. Marcus's expression changed. He hadn't expected her to repeat it. I didn't mean you did. Then she stepped outside. The door closed behind her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Marcus remained standing beside the table. His brother finally cleared his throat. Man. Marcus looked at him. What? I think you should let her go home. Marcus grabbed his glass. She does this. Diane looked at him. Does what? She gets upset, leaves, cools off, and comes back. Diane didn't answer. Marcus sat down again. He was irritated more than frightened. At least, that's what he told himself. Elena had never stayed angry for long. He knew her. By the time he got home that night, he expected to find her there. The house was dark. He turned on the kitchen light. Elena? Nothing. He checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the spare room. Then he noticed the closet. Several things were missing. Not everything. Just enough. A few dresses, shoes, some work clothes, the small box of personal things she kept on the top shelf. Marcus stood there. He went back downstairs and checked the driveway. Her car was gone. He pulled out his phone. Where are you? No response. He called, straight to voicemail. He called again. Nothing. An hour passed. Then another. Marcus sent another message. We need to talk. Elena finally replied. Not tonight. He stared at the screen. That wasn't the answer he expected. Are you coming home? 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. They appeared again. Finally, no. Marcus sat down on the edge of the bed. He read the message twice. The next morning, he called again. Nothing. By breakfast, he was angry. By lunch, he was worried. By evening, he was calling Diane. She just left, he said. Diane was quiet. What happened? We had an argument. What kind? Marcus sighed. She's been unhappy for a while. Diane didn't respond. Marcus added, I told her if she thought she could do better, she should. There was a pause. You said that? Marcus rubbed his face. I was angry. Diane sighed. Marcus, what? You shouldn't have said it. He didn't like hearing that. She'll come back. Diane didn't reassure him. Instead, she asked, Did you call her? Yeah. And? She doesn't want to talk. Marcus stared at the empty side of the bedroom. He still believed Elena would eventually return. He just didn't understand why the house suddenly felt different without her. And he had no idea that the belongings she took were the things she had quietly chosen weeks earlier, the things she needed to begin a life without him. By the next morning, Marcus had already told himself 3 different versions of what happened. In one version, Elena was simply angry. In another, she wanted attention. In the version he eventually told his family, Elena had been unhappy for months and finally decided to walk out. That version was easier. It didn't require him to explain what he had said at dinner. It certainly didn't require him to explain anything else. Elena spent her first morning in the new apartment sitting on the floor because she hadn't unpacked the chair yet. There were 2 boxes beside her. One was labeled kitchen. The other just said Elena. She opened the second one and found a sweater, some paperwork, an old photograph of her grandmother, and a coffee mug Marcus had once bought her because it reminded him of a joke between them. She held the mug for a moment. Then she put it back. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. She let it ring. A message followed. Can you please answer? She didn't. Another came later. I'm not trying to fight. Then, we need to figure this out. Elena finally replied, We can talk when I'm ready. That was all. Marcus called almost immediately. She didn't answer. Over the next few days, he moved between anger and concern. He told his brother Elena was being unreasonable. He told Diane that she had been unhappy for a long time. When someone asked whether there was another man, Marcus didn't correct the assumption quickly enough. The suggestion eventually reached Elena. A friend mentioned it carefully. People are saying you might have left because there's somebody else. Elena was quiet. There's not. Her friend waited. Do you want me to tell them that? Elena shook her head. No. Why not? Elena looked down at the coffee in her hands. Because then I'll have to explain everything. Her friend understood. There was nothing else to say. Elena didn't want to spend the next year answering questions Marcus had created in 5 minutes. She knew the truth. That had to be enough for now. Meanwhile, Marcus kept expecting her to return. He went into the house one evening and caught himself reaching for his phone to ask Elena what they should order for dinner. He stopped. The habit irritated him. He opened the refrigerator instead. There was still a container of food she had prepared before leaving. He stared at it, then closed the door. A few days later, Marcus told Diane that Elena had taken things without discussing them. Diane looked at him. Did she take anything important? No. Then maybe she took what she needed. Marcus didn't answer. He was beginning to notice things he hadn't paid attention to before. The house was quieter. There was no one asking whether he would be home for dinner. No one reminding him about family plans. No one leaving a light on when he came home late. He had assumed Elena's silence was a problem. Now he was beginning to realize it had also been a boundary. Still, he didn't understand the full reason she had left. He thought she needed time. He thought eventually she would miss the marriage enough to come back. Elena, meanwhile, had started making arrangements for the next stage of her life. She had a budget, a place to stay, copies of the records she had collected, and one decision she hadn't told Marcus about. She was done trying to convince people that her marriage had been real. It had been real. That was exactly why the betrayal hurt. She didn't need to rewrite the good years to justify leaving the bad ones. She simply needed to stop going back, and Marcus still had no idea what she had been quietly preparing for. The first time the younger woman asked Marcus when he was actually leaving Elena, he didn't have an answer. They were sitting in his car outside a restaurant. She had been quiet for most of dinner. Finally, she looked over at him. You said things were almost done. Marcus kept his hands on the steering wheel. They are. When? He glanced at her. I don't know. There are some things I have to work out. She shook her head. You've been saying that for months. Marcus sighed. I've got a lot going on. So does everybody. He looked away. She wasn't crying. That made the conversation harder. Marcus, I need you to be honest with me. I am. No, you're not. He opened his mouth, then stopped. She reached for her bag. You told me she knew the marriage was over. Marcus said nothing. You told me you were basically separated. We are. She's living somewhere else now. He looked at her. How did you know that? She stared at him. That isn't the point. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He had expected Elena to come back. He hadn't expected the other woman to start demanding answers before he had decided what to do next. Then she asked about the money. One of the charges she'd noticed was connected to an account Marcus shared with Elena. She had assumed he had been using his own money. Marcus tried to explain. It wasn't a big deal. She laughed once. Not because anything was funny. That's your answer? I was going to fix it. You keep saying that. Marcus reached for her hand. She pulled hers away. I don't want this. What? This. She looked through the windshield. I don't want to be with somebody who tells different stories, depending on who's listening. Marcus stared at her. You knew I was married. I knew you said the marriage was ending. It is ending. She opened the car door. Then finish one thing before you start another. She got out. Marcus watched her walk away. He didn't call after her. For once, he had nothing convincing to say. Over the next week, she stopped responding. Marcus sent messages. Nothing. He called once. She didn't answer. The relationship was over, and suddenly, Marcus was alone with the consequences of decisions he had spent months treating like separate problems. Elena was gone. The other woman was gone. The house was still his, but it no longer felt like the life he'd been trying to protect. So Marcus did what he thought would restore some control. He decided to move forward with the divorce, not because he had suddenly become honest, because he wanted the situation settled on his terms. He gathered paperwork. He reviewed their finances. He began preparing documents and convincing himself Elena would eventually understand that leaving had practical consequences. She had always been more cautious about money than he was. He knew that. He expected it to frighten her. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena had already spent weeks figuring out exactly what she could afford without him. And this time, when he came to her with the documents, he wasn't going to find the woman he expected. He was going to find the woman who had been quietly preparing for the moment he thought would scare her most. Marcus arrived at Elena's apartment on a Tuesday afternoon with a folder under his arm. She opened the door and looked at him. What is that? Can we talk? Elena stepped aside. Marcus walked in and placed the folder on the kitchen table. He remained standing. I think we need to make this official. Elena looked at the folder. Okay. He seemed surprised by how easily she said it. I had some paperwork prepared. I figured. Marcus pulled out a chair. You don't have to make this harder than it needs to be. Elena sat across from him. I haven't. He opened the folder. We need to talk about the house, the accounts, everything. Elena nodded. Marcus pushed the first document toward her. I'd like us to handle this without lawyers getting involved unnecessarily. Elena looked at the page, then back at him. Why? Because we're both adults. She almost smiled. Right. Marcus leaned forward. I know you're angry. I am, but this doesn't have to turn ugly. Elena studied him. For a moment she wondered whether he actually believed what he was saying. Marcus continued. I've tried to be reasonable through all of this. That was the sentence that changed something. Elena reached beneath the table and picked up a folder of her own. Marcus stopped talking. She placed it beside his. His eyes moved to it. What is that? Records. Of what? Elena opened the folder. The first page was a hotel receipt. Marcus stared at it. Then another, then another. His face changed. Elena. She didn't raise her voice. You said the hotel was work. Marcus swallowed. It was. She placed a message beside the receipts. Then, a financial transaction. Then another message. Marcus leaned back. Where did you get these? Elena looked at him. You left enough behind. He reached for one of the pages. His fingers stopped halfway. You went through my things. No. She slid another document toward him. You didn't need to make it difficult. Marcus looked down. There were dates, times, names, places, a timeline. He slowly sat back. How long have you known? Elena didn't answer immediately. Long enough. Marcus rubbed his forehead. Elena, I can explain. She looked at him. I know. That answer seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He started talking. The marriage had been unhappy. He'd felt ignored. He'd been lonely. Things had happened gradually. Elena listened. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she placed another set of papers on the table. These are the messages you sent her about me. Marcus looked at them. His face tightened. You told her I was difficult. He said nothing. You told her the marriage was basically over. Elena, you told her I barely talked to you. Marcus looked away. She waited. Then she placed one final page in front of him. It was a copy of one of the messages he had saved about Elena. Marcus recognized it immediately. His own selective record. His own attempt to build a version of the marriage where she looked unreasonable. He stared at the page. You were keeping records of me. Marcus didn't answer. Elena closed the folder. You weren't just preparing for a divorce. Her voice stayed calm. You were preparing a story. And for the first time since he had walked into the apartment, Marcus had nothing ready to say. Marcus didn't tell his family about the folder. Not immediately. For 2 days he said almost nothing. Then Diane called Elena. She didn't begin with an apology. She sounded uncomfortable. I heard you and Marcus are moving forward with the divorce. Elena sat quietly on the other end. Yes. Diane took a breath. I'm not trying to get in the middle. I know. I wanted to understand what happened. Elena looked down at the floor. You should ask Marcus. I did. And? Diane was silent. He said things had been bad for a long time. They had. Diane seemed surprised. You're agreeing with him? Elena gave a small, tired laugh. I didn't say the things he did were okay. Another silence. Diane lowered her voice. Was there someone else? Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Diane understood. Oh. That one word carried more than Elena expected. I didn't know, Diane said. I know. I thought you just left. I did leave. But, oh, Elena closed her eyes. Diane, I don't want you to take sides. I need to know what happened. Elena hesitated. Then she said, Marcus had an affair. Diane went quiet. For how long? I don't know exactly. Does he admit it? He knows I have the records. Diane breathed out slowly. What records? Elena didn't answer immediately. Then she told her. Not every detail, just enough. The messages, the hotels, the financial transactions, the things Marcus had told the other woman about the marriage, and then the notes he had kept about Elena. When the call ended, Diane didn't say goodbye right away. She simply whispered, I didn't know. Elena replied softly, I know. The next evening, Diane confronted Marcus. His brother was there too. Marcus stood in the kitchen while Diane held a printed message in her hand. Is this true? Marcus looked at it. Mom, is it? He rubbed his face. The marriage was already falling apart. Diane's expression changed. That isn't what I asked. Marcus looked away. Yes. His brother stared at him. You were seeing somebody. Marcus didn't answer. Diane sat down. She looked exhausted. You told us Elena walked out because she was unhappy. She was unhappy. That doesn't answer the question. Marcus's voice hardened. I made mistakes. His brother shook his head. No, you lied. Marcus looked at him. You don't know what happened between us. No, his brother said. But apparently neither did we. That silenced Marcus. Diane looked down at the papers again. Why were you keeping notes about Elena? Marcus didn't answer. Why? I was protecting myself. From what? He struggled to respond. I knew the divorce was going to get ugly. Diane stared at him. You were preparing to make her look bad. Marcus shook his head. That's not what I was doing. You saved only the things she said when she was angry. He looked away. Diane's voice became quieter. You didn't tell us the whole truth. Marcus finally sat down. Nobody yelled. That was worse. Because there was no argument he could win. There was only the uncomfortable reality of what he had done. And for the first time, Marcus understood that the story he had carefully built was no longer his alone to control. Elena hadn't called his family to expose him. She hadn't demanded that anyone believe her. The truth had simply caught up with the version of events he had been telling. And Marcus had no explanation that could make all of it disappear. The first month in Elena's apartment was harder than she expected. Not because she missed the house. She missed knowing where everything was. In the old kitchen, she could reach for a glass without looking. She knew which floorboard made noise at night. She knew how long the shower took to get hot. Here, every small thing required a decision, and some days, Elena was tired of making decisions. One Tuesday evening, she stood in the grocery store staring at 2 brands of coffee. She picked one, then put it back, then picked the other. A woman beside her glanced over. Elena laughed under her breath. It's just coffee, she murmured. The woman smiled. That's what I tell myself. It was such a small exchange that Elena almost forgot about it, but she smiled all the way to the checkout. Her life wasn't suddenly easy. She had bills now that she couldn't split with anyone. She watched her spending more carefully. She started taking lunch from home instead of buying it at work. She looked at her bank account before making plans. Some nights, that reality frustrated her. One Friday, she came home exhausted and dropped her keys on the counter. There was nothing waiting for her. No argument. No question about why she was late. No phone buzzing from another room. Just silence. For a few seconds, she stood there. Then she took off her shoes. She made herself dinner. She ate at the little table beside the window. And when she finished, she left the plate in the sink because she was too tired to wash it. Nobody complained. Elena smiled. The next morning, she washed it. Her career started improving too. She took on a project she had once been hesitant to accept. When her supervisor told her she'd handled it well, Elena almost dismissed the compliment. Then she stopped herself. Thank you, she said. It felt strange accepting praise without immediately explaining why she didn't deserve it. She also started seeing friends again. Nothing dramatic. Coffee after work. A birthday dinner. A phone call she didn't rush because Marcus was waiting at home. Slowly, ordinary things stopped feeling like temporary arrangements. They became her life. Marcus still contacted her occasionally. At first, his messages were practical. Then, they became less so. Hope you're doing okay. I found some of your things. Your old jacket is still here. Elena didn't always respond. When she did, she kept it brief. She wasn't trying to punish him. She simply didn't know what else there was to say. One evening, Marcus sent a message that stayed on her screen longer than the others. I never thought you'd actually leave. Elena read it twice. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She could have told him everything she had wanted to say. Instead, she locked the phone. She placed it face down. Then she went back to the book she had been reading. For years, Elena had measured her choices against the marriage. Now she was learning to measure them against herself. And that was when she finally understood that leaving Marcus had been only the first decision. The harder part was learning what to do with the life she'd chosen afterward. Months passed before Elena realized she had stopped checking Marcus's name when her phone rang. At first, every unexpected call had made her heart jump. Was it Marcus? Had something happened? Did he need something? Eventually, the reaction disappeared. Her life had become quieter in ways she hadn't expected. One Saturday morning, Elena was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee when her friend asked her a question. Are you seeing anybody? Elena looked up. No. Her friend smiled. You sure? Elena laughed. Pretty sure. You don't have to date. I know. There was a pause. I just don't want to. Her friend nodded. Fair enough. That conversation stayed with Elena. For a long time, She had assumed that leaving a marriage meant eventually finding someone else, as if being alone was only an uncomfortable space between relationships. But Elena wasn't interested in filling the space. She liked having it. She liked choosing what she wanted for dinner. She liked making plans without checking another person's schedule. She liked being able to come home from work and sit quietly without wondering whether she was about to be criticized for something she had done wrong. One evening, she caught herself standing in the kitchen, listening to nothing. No television, no footsteps, no phone conversation in another room, just the refrigerator humming. She smiled, not because she was celebrating being alone, because she realized she wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. Marcus had once told her to find better. For months, she had thought about those words. At first, they had sounded cruel. Then they sounded careless. Eventually, they became something else. They became a reminder that she had a choice. Better hadn't meant finding a richer man. It hadn't meant making Marcus jealous. It hadn't meant proving to his family that she was the better person. It meant being able to trust the person beside her. It meant being able to ask a question without being made to feel unreasonable for asking it. It meant not having to examine hotel charges and phone habits just to understand what was happening inside her own marriage. Most of all, it meant not confusing how long she could endure something with how much she was supposed to endure. Elena still remembered the good parts. That surprised people when she spoke about the divorce. She didn't hate every memory. Marcus had been kind to her once. He had helped her when her grandmother was sick. He had made her laugh. Those things had been real. So had the betrayal. One didn't erase the other. Elena didn't need to turn Marcus into a monster to justify leaving him. She only needed to accept that the man she loved was no longer someone she could trust. One evening, she opened an old box and found a photograph from their first year of marriage. Marcus was smiling at the camera. Elena smiled too. She looked at the photograph for a few seconds. Then she put it back. No anger, no tears. Just a quiet decision to let the memory stay where it belonged, in the past. And for the first time, Elena understood what better really meant. It wasn't another person. It was a life she didn't have to keep defending. Years later, Elena could still remember the exact moment Marcus told her to find better. Not because it was the worst thing he had ever done. It wasn't. The affair had hurt more. The lies had hurt more. What stayed with her was how ordinary his voice had sounded when he said it. He hadn't believed the words carried any real consequence. He had expected her to argue, maybe cry, maybe leave for a few hours and come back. For years, Elena had always come back. That was what Marcus had counted on. He had mistaken patience for weakness. He had mistaken silence for ignorance. Most of all, he had mistaken love for dependence. Elena didn't think about him every day anymore, but sometimes a memory surfaced without warning. A restaurant, a song, a particular brand of coffee. Something funny Marcus had once said. She never needed to force herself to forget those things. They were simply part of a life that had happened. A good memory didn't become a lie because the marriage ended badly. That was something Elena had taken a long time to understand. She also stopped wondering whether Marcus regretted losing her. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. It no longer changed what she had to do with her own life. She heard through Diane, much later, that Marcus had struggled after the divorce. His relationship with the younger woman had ended. His family no longer accepted every explanation he gave them. The house had eventually been sold. None of it made Elena feel victorious. She didn't want his life to fall apart. She had simply wanted the freedom to rebuild hers. One evening, Elena was cleaning her kitchen when she caught sight of herself in the window. She stopped. There was no dramatic realization. She simply noticed how comfortable she looked in her own home. The thought made her smile. She remembered the woman who had once sat in a grocery store parking lot, unable to decide whether she was allowed to leave a marriage that was hurting her. That woman had been frightened. She had also been trying. Elena understood that now. She hadn't been weak for staying as long as she did. But she also didn't have to stay just because she had once promised she would. She turned off the kitchen light. Before going to bed, she checked her phone. There was one old message from Marcus she had never deleted. "I never thought you'd actually leave." She read it once, then she deleted it. Not because she was angry, because she didn't need it anymore. Marcus had thought that night was the night Elena walked out. He remembered the chair moving, the front door closing, the silence afterward. For Elena, it meant something different. It was the night she stopped walking back. And maybe that was the part Marcus had never understood. He thought he was telling his wife to find better. He never imagined that, after years of trying to make the marriage work, Elena would finally believe him. She did find better, not another man, not a perfect life, just a life where she could come home, close the door, and know that whatever happened next belonged to her. Before you go, I want you to think about Elena's story for a moment. Sometimes, the hardest decision isn't leaving someone you stopped loving. It's leaving someone you still love because you finally realize love alone isn't enough. So let me ask you, if you were Elena, would you have walked away that night when Marcus told you to find better? Or would you have stayed and tried to save the marriage? Tell me honestly in the comments. There's no right answer, and I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story touched something in you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Graham's Stories for more emotional stories with lessons that stay with you. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until the next story, remember, never confuse someone getting used to your presence with someone truly valuing you.
Thank you for watching Mr. Graham's Stories, my beautiful, amazing family.